right, good morning.
Good morning.
So we're going to talk, as Rich mentioned, today about the Trump-Pence administration and how it impacts the broad economy, the energy industry, and we're going to drill down a little bit and we're going to talk about how it especially impacts you and your organization as energy engineers. So just to talk a little bit briefly about my credentials, I was born and raised in Kokomo, Indiana, central Indiana, and grew up with the Pence family. I worked closely with them for a number of years in Indiana as well as in Washington, D.C. I served in the George W. Bush White House as, first of all, the confidential assistant to Karl Rove, and then moved on to a role at the Department of Commerce. I also was the first female chairman of the National College of Republicans, and that was a position that was held by Karl Rove, Lee Atwater, and Jeff Sessions. Then my husband and I moved to Vietnam for 4 years, where he helped open the first GE power plant in Vietnam, and I worked for the U.S. government on commerce and trade issues. I've been in government relations for 10 years, served as a political commentator in the area, and now I do serve on the Trump-Pence transition policy team. I am focused on healthcare in the Department of Commerce, but I have spoken with folks from the energy group over the last week in order to prepare for this presentation. I do have to tell you that I am not speaking officially on behalf of the transition or on behalf of President Trump, but these are the insights that I see from being in the room, and these are my opinions on where the industry is going. I'm now a managing partner at Haynes & Associates, and we are a public affairs firm that's focused on policy and government procurement. We work with clients in energy, healthcare, transportation, and construction. I am a little bit newer to the energy industry, but through the firm, I've watched Joe Haynes, our president, who has worked in energy for several years, work on efficiency, renewable energy, procurement. We work a lot with energy management systems, retrofitting HVACs, building envelope, efficient LED lighting projects. We also do a lot of work with performance contracting and helping public officials to understand the importance of that and cost savings, which I'm sure you guys are out talking about every day with performance contracting. We also work with renewable energy and cogeneration, as well as anaerobic digestion and biomass. We have a company here today that's a veteran-owned business that does cogeneration and has just gotten into that game, and it's been really exciting to see them grow. So I wanted to kick off the presentation by saying that a quote that I love from Thomas Jefferson, and that is, we in America do not have government by the majority, but we have government by the majority who participate. As Rich noted, this has been a very contentious election, and especially in a state like Massachusetts, we have a lot of folks that are unsure about what's going to happen with the political landscape, particularly the fact that our delegation, they're all Democrats, our governor's lukewarm on the presidency. So a lot of businesses are saying, what do we do? Where are we at? Where do we go? And what I want to encourage you today and motivate you to do is to be involved. Even if you don't agree with them on all the issues or some of the issues, be involved. Be part of the policy and not the politics. Massachusetts companies are unique in that compared to a lot of companies in other states that we see, because Massachusetts companies have such a strong experience in technology, we have such a strong education sector, we have such strong skilled workforce, and we've done a lot of things here first. So it's really important that as businesses, you're thinking about how to proactively discuss policy and be part of the game, because it's going to impact your business, but also I think that you all have a lot to offer, and Massachusetts industries do as well. So let's talk about broad transition policy themes. The Trump-Pence administration is focused especially on three main points: jobs, the economy, healthcare, and national security. Now, if you look at the sub-bullets, they have a very long laundry list of things that they're going to fix, and I'm not sure how they're going to do it all, but they've got a lot of things that they're looking at and a lot of top priorities, right? So first of all, they're trying to address regulation. There are 20,000 new business regulations that they're looking to attract that came in over the last 8 years. 20,000. That alone could take them years to do. They want to take our current system of 7 tax brackets down to 3. They also want to provide new tax incentives for healthcare and for childcare. They want to change our trade agreements, the TPP. They want to evaluate what we're doing with NAFTA. They also, as you read the news, want to start penalizing China. Then they want to move on and work on infrastructure spending. They want the free market to drive that, and they're the first administration that's appointed a private board that will be giving advice on how to improve our infrastructure. And education, I think what's interesting for this crowd is the focus they want to put on vocational schools and skilled workers. They want to encourage folks that if they'd like to have a trade, they'd like to learn a specific talent like engineering to go in that direction. And they think that'll be a stimulator of the economy. You've heard all about immigration as an issue. Healthcare, we're hearing that in the first 100 days, they're going to make a big move on that. I've already seen that happening every day. And then national security. John McCain was just quoted yesterday saying that defense spending has declined by 21% in the last 8 years. So they also have a broken acquisition system at the DoD, and the DoD has not been audited, as you know, ever in its history. So it needs an audit. They say they're going to do that. A lot of presidencies have said they will, but let's see what happens. Cybersecurity. Everybody knows you deal with it in your job every day. And then, of course, also under national security is ISIS and what we see there. International relations, they want to focus on peace through strength. So they're trying to kind of invoke Reagan there. But as you can see, if you look, and I've highlighted it here, energy independence is not, it's not a topic that's in the news frequently right now. It's not something that's at the top of the list, but it impacts jobs in the economy and also national security. It impacts jobs in the economy because if we're producing our own energy, that's a way that we can obviously employ Americans. The Trump administration believes that there is $50 trillion worth of untapped oil and shale and other natural resources we could be taking advantage of. And the average American right now spends over $5,000 a year on energy, which, that's a huge impact on the economy. And if you're a low-income family, that's a lot of money. So that's something where they're looking at energy independence for the economy. For national security, as you know, everyone would like to be more independent from OPEC, especially what's happening in the Middle East. So what we see here, a few things for your group. Energy independence means producing more energy, but it also means being more efficient with the energy that we have and finding ways to be innovative and more efficient and not waste the energy that we have, but use what we've got so that we don't have to import more energy than we need. Also, wanted to make a highlight about the role of Congressman Pence. For some people, he came out of nowhere. Some people have known him for a long time, but he did serve for 12 years in Congress. He was a huge job creator in Indiana. He created 165,000 new jobs and invested $2.5 million in roads and for the infrastructure in Indiana. And he will be probably the linchpin in terms of the deal making and the legislative agenda for the president. He's already been out on the Hill since the day he got elected, and I think that's where he'll spend most of his time. So let's talk a little bit about energy independence. I pulled this quote from Forbes that President-elect Trump supports an all of the above energy strategy with a heavy tilt towards fossil fuels. He wants to remove the bureaucratic blocks to innovation in energy, and he also wants to use a mix of domestic energy resources. But what it comes down to is he wants to get rid of a lot of the regulations and let the industry do what it wants to do. So what does that mean for you guys? What we see is that energy independence is, it's going to be a strong term from this administration. Obviously, other administrations have discussed it. But what we see is that with increasing the supply of energy, whether by getting rid of regulations or innovating, right, to increase a greater supply, that will impact the need for greater efficiency. So lower fossil fuel prices will impact the need for efficiency measures. Maybe a company, maybe a potential client of yours, if they think that they can get, the energy that they're getting cheap enough, they might not be as incentivized to go into an efficient, initiative within the organization. So what we've been looking at and what we see is that across the board, through the Democrats and the Republicans, and with the transition team, because they are the majority business people, Trump himself is a business person, there seems to be bipartisan support for efficiency measures. Now the motives are different, right? On the right, you've got business folks that don't want to see waste, they want to cut costs. And on the left, you have some folks that are thinking in terms of energy efficiency more related to the environment and environmental preservation. But at the end of the day, we see that this could be an issue that unites both sides in the energy debate, just to be focusing on that energy efficiency, and we'd like to see that issue play out as kind of a unifier moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about some of the players at a high level. Obviously, over the next 6 months, the undersecretaries and the other positions, there's about 2,000 positions that will be appointed, and they will go through Congress to be approved. But at a high level, let's talk a little bit about the players. Governor Rick Perry, the new Secretary of Energy, or once he's confirmed, is from Texas. So obviously, it goes without saying that he has a lot of experience in oil and gas. He's a supporter of the XL pipeline, and he's done a lot of work with the Dakota Access Pipeline. So he is very interested and he leans heavily on that fossil fuel industry. One thing to watch with this, if you've done anything with nuclear energy, is that, a few things. First of all, we all know the history of the Department of Energy was actually when we were developing nuclear weapons during the Cold War. And 50% of the Department of Energy's budget actually manages the nuclear program and the nuclear waste and nuclear management. So what we're hearing and what we're reading is that one of the reasons that Perry was selected is because the broader government is determining what we'll do in terms of nuclear weapons, nuclear storage, but also is there a way to harness nuclear energy in a more safe way, which we'll get into later. Then we've also got Scott Pruitt. He is the Attorney General currently of Oklahoma, a constitutional lawyer. He's gotten a little bit of a bad rap because in his role he'd been suing the EPA on a few different issues. But if you watch his hearing, he really tries to articulate, and I've never met the guy, but he really tries to say that he believes in environmental protection, but he wants to introduce more of a balance so that you would see regulations that protect the environment, but also are focused on promoting jobs, safety, and opportunity. And then finally, his hearing was yesterday, Ryan Zink to be the Interior Secretary. He was a former Montana rep. He's also a former Navy SEAL. And he calls himself a Roosevelt Republican. He's pretty moderate. What's interesting about him is he's split away from the party on issues with federal ownership of land. And he doesn't want to see us selling off federal land. He wants us to hold that land and lease it out to companies for use to develop energy on them. So that'll be interesting because that's a place where he's broken off from Republicans, but a lot of Democrats have supported him on this issue. So his hearing confirmation actually went a lot more smoothly than I thought it would. But he's one to know. Also, as an aside, the folks at the New England Council, one of the guys at the New England Council, if you guys work with them, one of their wives just got appointed to work for him in DC. So, insider baseball if you're trying to track him down. So let's talk about the playbook. How are we going to get to be energy independent? Or how do they think we're going to get to be energy independent, right? So the first thing is the use of domestic resources. But what I found very interesting is not just traditional, so when you think of fossil fuels and shale, but also thinking about the renewables. This administration seems to be, and what I'm hearing from the transition, agnostic in terms of wind, fuel, coal. What they're seeing is, they're seeing that a lot of these industries have expressed that they have felt stifled over the regulations over the last 8 years. So they've got all these industries coming to them saying, we want to produce, lift this, we can produce more here, move this, we can produce more there. So there's this outpour of influence saying, we're ready to produce more, let's do it. So I think you're going to see that. I also think, this is the first administration to come out and say that they want to become a net energy exporter. That is very different. And it's going to be very complicated, which we'll get into, because we import a lot of fuel just from our partner Canada. Obviously, we have the OPEC issue. So that's very interesting. But in order to become an energy exporter, yes, we do need to produce more, but we have to be more efficient with what we have. And if we're more efficient with what we have, we'll be able to have the surplus that we can export. There's also one of the points that I don't have on the slide, but I wanted to make sure I emphasized here too, is innovation with the efficiency. Innovation will be key. I mentioned nuclear energy earlier. They're looking at a project now with small molten salt reactors in order to create safer nuclear facilities where they can actually use much safer nuclear reactors, they think. Hydropower, they're really excited about hydropower. They think they can increase hydropower production by 50% with little environmental impact. Then you've obviously got natural gas. That's a big issue in China right now. I spent a lot of time over there. Anybody who's been there, you've seen the sky. They're burning very, very, very dirty coal over there, and they have a lot of issues. So natural gas, it's going to be an interesting thing. It's going to be a geopolitical issue too, because Russia is the main exporter of natural gas to Europe. So you've got Russia taking this new role, trying to be, reassert themselves as a global power, and you've got the Europeans being dependent on them for natural gas. And then you've got China polluting. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what we do with that natural gas that we have to export, and how we use it to influence the global economy. We already mentioned that the administration is predicting that there will be $50 trillion in untapped natural resources. We mentioned the pipelines. Another thing to just note here is the onshore and offshore leasing of federal land. That is something that the administration is very keen on, being able to lease those lands and use those lands to produce our own energy. Everything I'm hearing is that the climate action plan and clean power plans will be scrapped. There were 14 Senate swing states up for grabs this year. 11 of the states that went Republican also were influenced by ads on the clean power plan and how bad it was for those states. Some of those states were Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So, the really strong swing states that some people were surprised ended up going Republican. So these regulations have been an issue politically somewhat. The administration says they want to reduce carbon emissions, and they say that they want to let the state level take care of that approach. So we'll have to see. Another issue too, I think though you're going to have as an obstacle with repealing those plans is the fact that states have their own regulations now. And in a lot of cases, if you look at constitutional law, state laws preempt the federal law in a lot of cases. So it's not going to be black and white. If you read in the news that this gets repealed, it may or may not impact you in the state that you're in. Another thing that the federal government plans to look at is ethanol. Apparently there are some new tests that have come out saying that ethanol is not as safe and clean as we thought. So those tests will be evaluated as well. And then at the same time, what we're hearing, which I think is key for you guys, is that the new EPA administrator, Pruitt, is keen on energy efficiency as a way to drive a cleaner environment. And they're hoping, because they're looking at the free market, they're hoping that free market drivers, so corporations trying to save money and save costs, will drive the incentive for energy efficiency amongst the work that's happening. So look for that to happen, and look for the EPA to be incentivizing that. Now let's talk about the obstacles with these lofty goals that they have, right? First of all, we mentioned just now the state right and the preemption issue. also, if you're really deep into the weeds and The Economist and other, deep policy articles, there's already a lot of current trends in the United States towards energy independence. So President Obama, to his credit, was focused on that. So there's already been a lot moving in that direction. We have a long way to go, but just something to keep in mind. This isn't something new, and a lot of folks have already been working on this. You also have to remember that the industry responds to shareholders. So if we have, and this is where it goes back to efficiency being so important, but if you have, you're flooding the market with more supply, that is going to drive down the cost of energy. How does that impact the shareholders at the end of the day? So I think that's something that we'll have to think about and look at. And we also have to think about the fact that, corporations have changed a lot over the past 15 years. Corporate social responsibility is very important now. So it's going to be interesting to see how shareholders and how things play out if EPA regulations actually are lifted, and how companies play in that space. Another thing that we should think about too is, the administration doesn't want to choose a winner. They're not in that game. But if you're looking at a lot of new energy coming online, you have to think about how that will impact the other markets. So for example, natural gas is very inexpensive, but if that comes in and it's much cheaper than coal, then even though the administration wants to help the coal industry rebound, it may not be possible to do so because that's just a market driver, right? Another thing to look at, let's talk about coal for a minute. As you know, the coal in the West is actually much better, much cleaner than the coal in Appalachia, but it's been a huge political issue to help. I'm getting someone shaking their head at me, but this is what I've been told. But yes, the coal is much. It's much more popular in Appalachia right now to be saving the Appalachian coal industry. You've seen a lot more press and a lot more political interest in doing that, and you haven't heard a lot from the West. But I think what's interesting to note about the coal industry is that a lot of the plants, not all of them, but a lot of the plants now are older. They were built in the 90s. There are some plants right now that are 60 years old. So if you have all these market prices that are fluctuating around, what's the incentive for businesses to invest in developing ways to process coal? What's the incentive to continue to focus on that industry and invest in that industry? So I think that's going to be I think the administration wants to help coal, but I think that's going to be another big impact, is just how, the actual market itself, and what's the reason to invest in that industry if it seems to be dying. The other, last point, trade policy skirmishes. We trade a lot of energy with Mexico, and NAFTA is going to be apparently, I think, reevaluated. That could hurt our export pipeline. So if we want to export, we want to become an energy exporter, all the issues that we're having with trade impact that directly. So we have to look at how our broad trade relationships play out over the next 8 years. Again, I wanted to go back to how this impacts, our group. Efficiency is sometimes referred to as the fifth fuel. And at the end of the day, efficiency, as you can see, is much cheaper even than wind and solar. It's much less expensive to save energy than to produce more energy. So we see this as an opportunity for this industry to be going out and pursuing ways to save energy. What we've identified through the administration is that the way to communicate with this new administration is on business terms and on numbers. So being able to communicate savings through performance contracting, we believe will be the best way for you to communicate with the new administration. So next steps, here's our challenge to you guys. First, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy I was told specifically by my folks in DC, this is one that they're really looking at in terms of how to achieve their goals of energy independence and energy exports. So this office has been around for a while. This is not a new thing. But just to kind of think about it, the federal government is the nation's largest energy consumer. And they've been working through the Obama administration, and to his credit, and if you're in the defense industry, you've seen this directly, they've been working to make the entire government more efficient. So this is a place where I think you're going to see the Trump administration try to lead by example. And they have a large network of researchers. They have funding. I think that's going to be an interesting place to go, especially through the Federal Energy Management Program. So if you are a federal government contractor or you've thought about it, your company does this, these are the places where we see opportunities for energy efficiency because the federal government is such a large consumer of energy. And I also would like to say you're going to see on this note continued performance contracting, public-private partnerships. You're going to see a very interesting changes in terms of government acquisitions, but also, we've all heard about Solyndra, we've all heard about government loans and how some of those programs played out. There will be strong reevaluation of those issues, and the government, the administration understands that they do need to make investments into industry in order to help grow what they need for themselves and what they need to acquire. But I think you're going to see all that financing change. So I think that's something to watch. But you're going to see an administration that's more focused on the public-private partnership and the performance contracts in terms of how they procure and in terms of how they plan. I want to open up for questions and comments, and also just feedback or thoughts. I'll be with the transition team actually this afternoon. So if I'll put my contact information up here. Being from Indiana, for me personally, it was a huge adjustment to do business here. And so one of the things that I've done over the past 6 weeks, and I talked to Steve about this, is I really see it being important in my role to help Massachusetts companies communicate and focus on the policies. So if you have specific thoughts or white papers or things like that, I really think it's important because Massachusetts has such a great economy, and I know it's hard for a lot of folks. A lot of folks maybe didn't support Trump Pence, but at the end of the day, it's better to have your voices heard. So if you have ideas, grab me, call me, whatever, and I'll help you out. So anyway, with that being said, questions?
Question on tax incentives for leveling the playing field for energy sources. Is the administration looking to sort of get rid of some of these incentives that put an imbalance in the energy picture?
That is a great question. So I used to work for First Wind and did work with the PTC production tax credit, which has been out there forever in the subsidies. I think you're going to see this administration want to get rid of a lot of those subsidies. For a number of different reasons, but I think they really want to see how the free market impacts the energy community. I think you'll see a lot of those maybe go away. But at the end of the day, you also have to remember it's Congress's decision. And a lot of folks, right? One state loves the PTC or one state loves their subsidy because that's their industry. So you'll see some fights on that. It won't be just a unilateral. It can't be a unilateral decision. Yeah.
Carbon tax. Regional greenhouse gas initiatives. Are these issues now dead? Is that something that anybody's discussed? Is it kind of neutral? Can you give us any direction there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're dead. I'd say they're not popular with this administration. But I think that on that note, I think that's where you're going to see a lot of, I see on issues like that, of a lot of the legislators, just like the subsidies, playing a strong role in that, because you've had folks that were working on legislating that policy up through the administration. So, I wouldn't say it's dead on arrival. I don't think it's something they are interested in doing, but I think that the way that it could continue would have to be through the legislators.
Question?
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for the brief, strategic, very supply side focus, if you will. My question is as a consumer.
Yeah.
I care about my house, my car, public transportation. Is there something with the new administration concerning incentives for the consumers? House incentives for energy, you know, the window incentives come and go, the heating incentives as a homeowner, those type things, solar, for my car incentives. A lot of talk about that for we the people, so we can participate and help and be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
I think that's a really great point. I personally have not seen that. Now, like I said, I've been down there on healthcare every day versus energy, but the energy folks, I have not discussed that or heard that from them. I think that's a really good idea. So that's something that I'll definitely mention, and I think that's a great idea, and hope that we would see that.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. I have a question as oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge your presentation. Thank you very much. It was very enlightening. I think sometimes I just want to acknowledge that. But as we are a service-disabled veteran-owned business, and we are in the contract and going directly after the energy, what we found was, and I wanted your thoughts, was this. First of all, there's a mandate from, and I may say something that you guys know already, there's a mandate from the Obama administration for renewable energy. And when we speak to the procurement officers, these people are jumping out of their chairs saying, oh God, can you do this? This is something we need. This is something we get incentivized for. So, and then because we have our classification, they get an additional part of that. So I wanted your additional bonus or part of they get to check the box. So I wanted your thoughts on, this is just from the Obama administration, so maybe you can add to that and see what it is for now they think the government for the Pence-Trump administration.
Yeah, that's a great question. We saw a lot of companies actually straddle with that 8 years ago with the administration, and there was actually, when those programs started, there was a lot of rub between the traditional military brass and the defense guys that wanted to be focused on defense, and the new Obama brought in political appointees who were not traditional defense folks. So there was a lot of rub within the agency to actually get those programs flowing. And I think what you're going to have to see in order for those programs to succeed is that the Trump-Pence administration is going to have to be focused on the lead by example. So Charlie Baker in Massachusetts has done a wonderful job with that. We have a department in the state that's called the Leading by Example program. So I think that's why we've had a lot of discussion with the DRE and the Department of Energy. As long as there's still that incentive within the administration to lead by example, I think that those types of programs will be preserved. Will they probably be run differently? I would guess. I mean, specifically at DoD, there is a huge issue with the civilian population coming in and impacting that. But at other agencies, there's a lot of work that's already being done, and I don't see them investing in upending that type of investment. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Regarding the nuclear power industry, is the new administration likely to discourage the construction of traditional nuclear plants until this new technology comes into play?
I wouldn't say they're discouraging it, but what the current issue is there's a lot of regulation around the current way that nuclear power plants are built. So it's very expensive for companies to do it. I think there's going to be two issues. One is loosening the regulations on, well, if you can, right? Because you want to have safety, we don't need to have an issue. But also the other issue is these new technologies that are coming out allow for much less risk. So as I mentioned before, I don't think that they're trying to pick a winner, and I don't think that they're going to specifically wait on anything, but I think you're just going to see the market kind of stagnate with the traditional power plants as long as the regulations are where they at, albeit we probably need those regulations for safety. And you've got these new technologies that are coming in that I foresee will be incented probably by the federal government in order to get to that energy efficiency and that energy independence.
Okay, great. Well, let's give a round of applause.